You are about to hear excerpts from various talks by Dr. Herbert Shelton to introduce the subject of natural hygiene. The complete talk from which each excerpt has been taken is available.
If I can make you understand that there never was a disease, acute or chronic, that was not the logical evolutionary outgrowth of causes, almost all of which lie within your own voluntary control, I will have placed in your hands a knowledge that will save you much future suffering and expense and will also prolong your life by years. The sooner we all learn that we can have health, but that we can have it only on nature's own terms and cease trying to achieve it on any other basis, the sooner will we emancipate ourselves from the great sea of sickness in which we now exist. The present method of treating gastric ulcers is to give analgesics, antacids, and various other drugs, sippy diet, bland diet, feed every 2 hours during the day and night, operate after they've cured the case 9 times, and then take out part of the stomach, and then the next year take out the rest of the stomach. I have patients that recovered by hygienic means as far long ago as 30 years that are still free of ulcers. I've had patients, I had one that had an ulcer, been suffering with ulcers for 30 years. I've got one in my place now, came in from Chicago that had ulcers for 15 years. He's free of ulcers. He is recuperating now from a lengthy fast. He has no ulcer. If he takes care of himself as he's instructed in the health school, he will remain free of ulcer for the balance of his life. Colitis, so-called mucus colitis, and ulcerative colitis both get well equally as well and almost as rapidly in a fast as does the gastric ulcer. Now, after you're well of these things, if resting, mental, physical, and physiological resting, have enabled the body to restore the integrity of its tissues and restore its functioning efficiency, then if you will live correctly thereafter, you will not again build your trouble. We build our own diseases. We are the architects of our own miseries. We have been taught for so long to blame our troubles on God, on devils, on demons, on the stars, on germs, on viruses, on everything but our own selves, that we don't like to assume responsibility for our conditions, and yet we are responsible.
If a person has not lived according to the laws of nature and is really ill, do you believe you can bring this patient back to health within a reasonably short time by following natural laws anew?
I didn't tell you the things I believe. I've been in practice for 41 years. In that time, I've cared for between 30 and 35,000 patients. I know what we can do. I've seen cases that were pronounced hopelessly incurable, restored to excellent health. I know that sometimes we get cases that have already reached the stage of irreversibility, and nothing will bring them back to health. But I also know that before they reach that stage, they can all be restored to health if they will adopt a hygienic plan and stick to it.
How can you replace antibiotics with your method?
We don't want to replace them. They are the efforts to replace nature's own methods. Our methods, the hygienic methods, are the originals. They're the ones that man used, and all the animal kingdom used. They're part of life, as I tried to point out. Any effort to use anything else is the effort to replace the normal ways of life with abnormal ways. The wholesome ways with the unwholesome. The non-toxic with the toxic. The antibiotics are simply toxic substances. That very term antibiotic means opposed to life. And while they try to make you think that they're opposed only to bacterial life, they're also opposed to cellular life. And the number of deaths that have occurred from the use of antibiotics throughout the world, and nobody knows how many, those that have been reported are supposed to be only a small percentage of what have actually occurred, have amounted to a worldwide slaughter. We don't want to replace a thing like that with something equally as slaughterous, but we want to replace them, or rather displace them, by a return to the normal ways of life. Making it possible for me to come to you with what I believe to be one of the most important messages that can be brought to anybody. The most important thing that I want to impress upon you this evening is that health or disease may be ours by choice. Now, what do I mean when I say that these may be yours by choice, either the one or the other? In the past, you have been taught to believe that whether you were well or sick was more or less a matter of haphazard. If you were well, you were merely fortunate. If you were sick, well, then you were unfortunate. It was a thing over which you had little or no control. So when you became ill, you sent for a physician or a doctor of some kind to treat you with one kind of treatment or another. If you recovered, he was a great doctor. If you died in spite of his efforts to save you. This is about the sum and substance of what you have been taught in the past. You might avoid, according to the teachings, certain diseases by having yourselves vaccinated or inoculated. But they only have vaccines and serums for a very few of the illnesses from which man suffers. So they promise you immunity only against a few diseases. Actually, they cannot deliver even that promise. There is no greater fraud in all the world than the vaccine and serum practice. But nonetheless, that was all they offered you. Immunity to a few diseases by introducing into your bodies, through your skin, substances taken from diseased animals or substances made by culturing and perhaps killing microbes and giving you a dirty soup made up of microbes that were supposed to be the cause of one disease or another. Smallpox vaccine is nothing except pus taken from festering sores on the abdomen of a previously infected cow. And all they do is to give you a pus infection, making you nice and sick, giving you a very sore arm with enlarged glands and fever and malaise, and sometimes much worse trouble. And they promise you that as a consequence of making you ill, you will thereafter be proof against a worse illness. In other words, they promise to prevent a big disease by giving you a little one. The idea that man can be immunized is really a superstition. If immunization were a fact, if it were possible to really and truly immunize you against any so-called disease, it would constitute a setting aside or an annulling of the law of cause and effect. It would mean that you could come in contact with cause or take it into your body and it would have no effect. I think I could make that thing very clear to you, that principle very clear to you, if I tell you a story about a serum that I once invented myself. I invented a serum that immunized one against burning. I called that serum Blisterine. I took the watery exudate that forms in a blister when one is burned, and I cultured it, triturated it, and put it through various very intricate processes until finally I had what I thought was the serum that would immunize one against burning. I inoculated a test subject with it. I gave him one inoculation a week for a period of 3 weeks, at which time, of course, theoretically, he was immunized against burning. Now, all of you have heard that old adage, he that sitteth upon a red-hot stove shall rise quickly. Well, I took this immunized man and I picked him up and I set him down upon a red-hot stove. And to my amazement, he sat there and laughed at me. Now, you don't have to believe that story. I don't believe it myself. But it is just as foolish to imagine that you can be immunized against one cause as it is to imagine that you can be immunized against another cause. That the law of cause and effect can be set aside by pus from a sick cow, by putrid serum taken from a sick horse, by a dead bug squirt made of dead germs of one kind or another, and that by putting these filthy things into your body, the law of cause and effect can be set aside, and you can be immunized against illness. Only very superstitious people can believe that. Now, they may be highly educated. They may call themselves scientists. They may be highly respected. They may be very intelligent. And they may be very good men and women. They may be sincere and honest. But they still are hugging a delusion. When I come to you this evening and say that health and disease may be yours, either the one or the other as you yourself choose, I do not offer to you a program of immunization. I do not come to you and say that we will know the laws of life, that we'll set them aside and we'll do as we please and have health in spite of cause. I would not insult your intelligence by promising you any such thing. But what I do want to say to you is that whether you have one or the other depends upon whether or not you supply the conditions of the one or of the other. The laws of life never change. They're unalterable, they're immutable, and they're eternal. And they're just as sure and certain in their operations as any of the laws of this universe. An old professor once made the remark that a man who jumps from a tall building does not violate the law of gravity, he illustrates it. The same thing is true with us in doing other things. We do not violate any of the laws of life. It is impossible to violate a law. It is only possible that we illustrate them. The same chemical affinity that preserves a stick of dynamite under one set of conditions explodes that stick of dynamite under a change.
Then I don't have to do so good. I judge from the remarks of the chairman that not all of you are members of the Rochester Natural Hygiene Society. Perhaps you do not even know what hygiene is. Oh, I know all of you have been to school and you've learned the things that were called hygiene in your school books. You know how to brush your teeth and how to wash your hands and take a bath occasionally, at least every Saturday night. You know those things. And that's what you learned as hygiene in high school and in grade school. But that is not what we mean by natural hygiene. And I might say that all the hygiene there is natural. And the only reason we add the term natural to our term hygiene is to distinguish it from the spurious type of hygiene that is commonly taught in our schools and colleges. At the time the system known as the hygienic system came into existence more than 130 years ago, attention to hygiene was not known. No attention was given by the various medical professions of that time to hygiene. And when the hygienic system was originated and promulgated, it made rapid progress among the people, despite the opposition of the medical professions, with occasional exceptions in those professions. It grew to such an extent that finally the medical profession began to take cognizance of the value of hygiene. And would you believe it that sometime between 1880 and 1890, the first medical college in the world put in the first chair in hygiene in the college. After nearly 3,000 years, they began to give a little attention to hygiene, but they perverted it. So we found it necessary to add that word natural and make it natural hygiene in order to distinguish it from the spurious type or the perverted type that is commonly taught. Hygiene is the intelligent use of the primordial requisites of life in the care of the mind and the body, both in health and in sickness. Now, it is a basic principle of hygiene that while there are normal requisites of life that the sick organism may not be able temporarily to make use of, there is never a time in life, sick or well, when it can make use of substances and influences and agents that it does not need and cannot use in a state of health. This means, of course, that all that great mass or catalog of poisons that is contained in the pharmacopoeias of the world and that are employed or have been employed in the treatment of the sick by the various medical professions, all of which are poisons, as I have mentioned, have no value either in health or in sickness. We know very well that if you give them to a well man, they make him sick. We know equally as well that if you give them to a sick man, they make him sicker. They do not have one effect in the body of the sick and an opposite effect in the body of the well. They produce disease or cause disease under all conditions and circumstances of life. When introduced into the body must resist them, it must expel them, and it must repair damages. And the processes of resistance, of expulsion, and repair that follow the ingestion of these poisons into the body have in the past been mistaken for the actions of the drugs. I am quite sure that every one of you have used the expression many times in your life in speaking of some particular drug that you took, let us say, for constipation, that drug acts on the bowels. Actually, the action is on the part of the bowels, and the action is intended to expel the drug. It is an expulsive effort. The drug is just as inert when taken into the human digestive system as it is while still in the box or bottle on the druggist shelf. It can no more act in the human stomach or in the human intestine or in the human colon or in any other part of the human body than it can act in box or bottle. Its chief characteristic, as any physicist will tell you, is that of inertia. And that is simply the power to do nothing. And that's what it does. The action is on the part of the body, not that of the drug. I'm not going to take time tonight to go into all the details. I could spend a week talking on that one subject without exhausting it. I want to come down to the subject of hygiene proper. I merely made these statements to give you, if I could, an understanding of what takes place when you take substances of any nature into your body that the body cannot convert into living structure. Only those substances that can be converted into living structure are food, and all other substances, if taken into the body, are poison and must be expelled. And that expulsion requires the expenditure of precious life energy, so that the more of those things the patient is given, the less are his chances of recovery. To recover health, and that is what the majority of people today are interested in, because almost everybody is sick. Only they do not know exactly what they are interested in. They know that they would like to be well, but they want somebody to make them well. If somebody could bore a little hole in their head and put a little funnel in there and pour health into them, they'd be very happy to pay good prices for it. But health is not to be obtained by any such process, or any process analogous to it. Health is to be obtained by processes that are entirely different. And it is this to which I wish to address myself at the beginning. The first requisite for the recovery of health is the removal of causes that have impaired and are impairing health. This has not been the traditional practice in any of the schools of so-called healing. They have sought to treat the patient. Primarily, they have sought to suppress the symptoms. And if they can suppress a symptom, they are happy to announce that the patient is better. Actually, he may be worse. Often, a physician will say that the patient is out of danger, and within 24 hours, the patient is dead. Because the physician, standing in his own light by masking symptoms, by his suppressive measures, does not actually know the condition of his patient. If the patient has pain, he gives an anodyne to relieve the pain, which means that he sandbags the nerves into insensibility. They are no longer able to give a warning. Do you have a headache? He gives you an aspirin or some other drug to stop your headache temporarily. Not something to remove the cause of the headache, but something to temporarily suppress the pain. Do you have constipation? He gives you a laxative or a cathartic, or a purge or a drastic, to force bowel action. He does not do anything to remove the cause of the constipation. Something to force bowel action. But the use of these things invariably makes constipation worse. Do you have a diarrhea? Then he gives you something to check the diarrhea. Not something to remove its cause, but something to check it, such as opium, for example, which will check bowel action. Or if he does not give you a drug to temporarily suppress and palliate your symptoms, he likes to cut upon you. He chops off your toes to cure corns. He cuts off your head to cure headaches. He takes out your appendix to cure appendicitis. He takes out your tonsils to cure tonsillitis. His idea is that the proper way to cure a diseased organ is to remove the organ and destroy it. Now, there are certain organs that can't be removed without resulting in instantaneous death, so he doesn't attempt to remove your brain or heart. So far as the brain is concerned, most people could possibly let theirs be removed because they don't use it. If they did, they wouldn't submit to the practices that I'm describing. You go for operation after operation. For example, a year ago, a little better than a year ago, a friend of mine underwent an operation for an ulcer of the stomach. They removed about half of his stomach. He has another ulcer of the stomach. They didn't remove cause. They removed part of the stomach. So, he has another ulcer. Now they want to operate, take out the rest of the stomach, and unite the esophagus with the duodenum. But they still haven't removed cause. If they do that, there is nothing to prevent the development of a duodenal ulcer, which will call, of course, for another operation. The surgeon is rarely satisfied in a given case. He starts out with the idea that I'll restore this man to health by taking him apart piece by piece and consigning him to the garbage pail. So he gets his teeth, and he gets his tonsils, and he gets his gallbladder, and he gets his appendix, and he gets his prostate gland and his seminal vesicles. If it happens to be a female, he gets her tubes and her ovaries and her womb. He gets anything he can that won't result in instantaneous death. And his idea is that if I can convert this person into a mass of scar tissue and a bundle of nerves, then I can send him to a psychiatrist. And the psychiatrist can tell him all your diseases are all imaginary, there's nothing wrong with you. It's all emotional disturbances, and if we can just get you straightened out emotionally, all will be well. Psychiatry came into existence to help out the surgeon. None of these measures, whether surgical measures or drug measures, are intended even remotely to remove the causes of the trouble. Now, hygiene is not vegetarianism. It embraces vegetarianism. That is, vegetarianism is a small part of hygiene. But I find many people who imagine that if they're vegetarians, they're hygienists. And I have them coming to me and saying, well, now, I've been a vegetarian for 10 years, for 8 years, for 5 years, or for 20 years, or longer. And then they ask me, now, why am I sick? Or why don't I get well? And sometimes it seems almost a Herculean task to make these people to understand that vegetarianism is not a complete way of life. It is not hygiene, which is a complete way of life. Hygiene is the intelligent application of all of the primordial requisites of life in the care of both the well and the sick. It has nothing to do with trick diets, and there are many of these being offered to the public today. It has nothing to do with treatment devices and methods of various kinds. Hygiene is not a therapeutic system. Hygienists are not engaged in curing disease, nor in selling cures. I know that when the question period comes this evening, and I get your questions up here, and we start to read them off, I'm going to get many questions that will run about like this. Will hygiene cure arthritis? Can I cure a tumor of the breast without an operation? Other questions of that kind are going to come up with that word cure in it. Now, if you're a genuine hygienist, you have gotten away from the ancient belief in cure, which belief originated with the ancient shaman. And the ancient shaman was identical with the modern voodoo practitioner. Shamanism, voodooism, medicine, they were all one. And it was the ancient shaman or the ancient voodoo practitioner that conceived the idea that disease can be cured or that it should be cured. Hygienists are not interested in cures. I never cured anybody in all of my life, and I hope that I never deteriorate to the point where I attempt to do anything of the kind. I have no cures to offer, no cures to sell, neither here nor in my institution in San Antonio. It's crowded at all times with people who have had all kinds of cures. They've been through the cures of the various schools of so-called healing. They've had drugs and serums and vaccines and x-rays and radium and surgery. And they've had Christian Science and various other types of cure. And if those things had been successful, they wouldn't be at my place. As a matter of fact, if those things were successful, I would have starved to death a long time ago. But they keep filling up my institution. And I never cured one of them. Although they come there as scraps and derelicts, they come there as a last resort, and they do get well. Not because I cured them, and not because anything I did for them or to them cured them. I'll explain what happened as we go along. I want to discuss for you this evening, first, the means by which health may be restored. Then I will go from there to point out to you how it may be maintained, not by the few, but by the millions. How you may have high-level health, not just mediocre health, not the kind of health that you say is tolerable. Oh, we can meet people on the streets in the morning and say, "Good morning, Mr. Jones, how are you?" Oh, and he'll say, I'm feeling fine. He probably had an aspirin before he left home. Or he took a cathartic or a laxative. Or he had an enema. Or he took a cold bath to wake himself up when he got out of bed. The old-timers used to have an eye-opener in the form of a toddy. Many of you take a cup of coffee, but others take a cold bath. It all serves the same purpose. If you need anything to wake you up in the morning, besides the vigor that you should acquire during your period of rest and repose, there's something wrong with you. You shouldn't need any forcing measures of any kind. You should bounce out of the bed in the morning like a young child or a young colt, full of vigor and full of vim and raring to go. Shouldn't have to have goads and tricks to drive you along and push you through the day. The first requisite of recovery of health is the removal of all causes that have impaired and that are maintaining the impairment of health. I don't care the name that they give to your so-called disease. Your so-called disease is a complex of symptoms, and they name it one disease or another disease, largely according to what particular symptom or two or three symptoms predominate. But you will discover, if you take any standard work on symptomatology of the various diseases and read over the symptoms of these various diseases, you will discover that the symptoms are all very much the same. Imagine the number of diseases in which you have fever, a coated tongue, a bad taste in your mouth, rapid breathing, rapid heart action, pain somewhere in the body, constipation or diarrhea, or the one alternating with the other. Imagine the number of acute diseases that present these symptoms, and they're distinguished one from the other by one or two other symptoms. It's a mere complex of symptoms. You're sick, in other words, and it's sickness you're dealing with, whether it's an acute disease or a chronic disease, and these names are used to becloud and confuse both you and the practitioner. So I do not care the name that is attached to your trouble. If we can find and remove the cause, neither the name nor the symptoms amount to anything. And that is the first requisite of recovery of health. Remove cause. Imagine trying to sober up a drunk man while he continues to drink. It's just as foolish as trying to restore a man to health while he continues to produce his sickness by his indulgences and practices day by day. You build your own diseases. You're the architects of your own misery. And so long as you continue to build it, the man who comes along and says, here, by removing your tonsils, or by pulling a teeth, or by taking out your appendix, or by excising your ovary, or by taking this pill, or shooting a little penicillin into your bloodstream, and ignoring the causes, I can restore you to health. That man is practicing voodooism. He may be highly scientific. He may be a university graduate. He may be regarded as one of the leading scientists of the world. It doesn't make any difference. There's as much voodooism in the minds of scientists today as there is in the minds of the layman. Our civilization has not yet been enabled to divorce itself from its ancient heritage of voodooism. Imagine trying to cure the tired following work or exercise with some kind of a pill or potion while the individual continues to work or to exercise. Imagine trying to restore potency to a sensualist by dosing him with a gland extract and permitting him to continue his sensual practices. Or trying to overcome the effects of gluttony with a pill or a potion of some kind or another while the individual continues to hog it. Imagine giving a patient a pill to cure the effects of worry while the man continues to worry himself into the grave. It is not possible to remedy troubles without removing their causes. For this reason, so long as the cause is present and is operating, it will continue to produce its effects. Now, hygienists insist that it is more logical and more rational to study causes and effects than it is to seek for cures. We've had more than 3,000 years of intensive searchings for cures. In all parts of the world, the search for cures has gone on. I once counted the number of cures for the common cold that have been discovered since the first shaman, sometime before the dawn of recorded history, discovered the first cure for a cold. It ran something over 7,000,006. Now, anybody that doubts my count can go back and recount them. But it doesn't make any difference whether I'm a few cures off or not in my count. The fact remains that with all the cures for the common cold that have been discovered, they still have no cure for the cold. Only the other day, I heard a joke. A man went to a physician and he said to him, "Doctor, I have a cold. What shall I do?" It was in the dead of winter when this took place, and the doctor says, "Well, now you go and take a cold bath. And while you're still wet and still unclad, you go out into the icy blast of winter and stand out there for half an hour." And the patient said, "Well, doctor, if I do that, I'll get pneumonia." And he said, "Well, we've got a cure for pneumonia." They have cures for all the formidable troubles. All the more serious forms of disease or pathology, they have cures for them. They claim they're curing 70,000 cases of cancer a year in this country. But they can't cure a cold. They can't cure pimples that you may have on your face. They can't cure a simple, uncomplicated constipation or a functional indigestion. They can't cure the simplest forms of pathology, but they tell you they can cure pneumonia and cancer. Well, I'll tell you how they cure cancer. It's a very simple matter. I've had a lot of them to get well in my institution. I never cured one, of course. I've had them to get well in 3 days. 3 days to get well of cancers. Not real cancers, but diagnosed cancers. I've had numerous of them to get well in from 3 days to 2 weeks. After immediate operations were insisted upon, and the patient was told that only an operation could be of value, and if you wait for a short while longer, it may be too late. And then they'd get well in 3 days or a week or 2 weeks. Was it cancer? I say no. And these are the kinds of cancers that are being cured by those who say they cure cancer, because these kinds of cancers are getting well all the time, with or without treatment of any kind. Old Mother Nature is constantly busy restoring us to health in spite of ourselves. The constant and ceaseless tendency of all life is upward, healthward. And the very instant that anything, even the slightest deviation from normal, takes place in the living organism, that very instant repair processes are set into operation. That very instant the body begins to heal itself. And the only reason you never get well is that you do more damage each day than old Mother Nature can repair during the night. If you did not continuously break yourself down, the repair processes of life would keep you in excellent condition and repair your slight damages. And this is the healing work. It is not something that somebody does to you or for you. Healing is a vital process. It is done by you. You get well under your own power, by your own steam, and nobody gets you well. Nobody cures you. Nobody else restores you to health. The only thing that anyone else can do for you that is of any constructive value is to teach you, to guide you, to direct you. And that's only necessary because you have permitted yourself to be brought up not just in ignorance, but in misinformation. You believe in cures. Maybe many of you don't, but the world in general believes in cures. And the first thing it does when it scratches itself with a pin is to run and have an injection of anti-rabies, not anti-rabies, but anti-lockjaw serum, anti-tetanus serum. And there are more people killed every year by anti-tetanus serum than ever die of tetanus. Serums and vaccines are all killative. They all produce trouble. There is no such thing as a safe vaccine or serum. There never has been one. And in the very nature of things, there never can be one. It is not possible to introduce through the skin, into the tissues, or into the bloodstream of human beings foreign substances, however innoxious they may be otherwise, without running the great risk of producing danger. Even distilled water can be dangerous. The white of an egg can kill you. The protein of milk can kill you. Even innoxious things, ordinarily innoxious things like this, are deadly if they're introduced directly into the blood and tissues without first undergoing the processes of digestion. All vaccines and serums have left behind them a trail of disease and death. And there is not a vaccine or serum now in use, or one that has ever been in use. From more than 3,000 years ago, when they first began to use them, I mean the medicine men of savage tribes used vaccines and serums long before our so-called scientific physicians took up the practice. The first vaccine used against smallpox, for example, was made from the zebu calf, which is a form of cow or cattle that lives in India, and was used 1500 B.C. to prevent smallpox. There has never been a vaccine or a serum that has ever prevented disease, any disease that it has been given to prevent. With this exception, all of these vaccines and serums have killed many people. And these people that have been killed have been saved from further disease. They have been protected by the immunizing potency of death. That's the only time a vaccine or a serum can prevent disease. These things do not remove cause. How can you prevent disease without avoiding its cause? Do they know the cause of polio? Oh, they tell you they know 4 viruses, and they think there may be more that cause polio. Well, if such viruses exist, they're with us all the time. They've been with us all down the ages. Epidemics of polio should have existed a long time ago. They should be with us every summer, all through the year in all parts of the country. And it shouldn't be just a handful of people in each community that develop polio. We live in a notion of these viruses, if they're genuine articles. I think they brought viruses into existence merely to save the tottering germ theory. They had so many diseases that they couldn't find the germ for, that they had to have something to save it. Now, the word virus is a very old word. It goes all the way back to the Sanskrit. In French, in Latin, and in Sanskrit, also in Greek, as well as in English, it has always meant poison. Any poison is a virus. But they give you a virus today as though it were a living organism. In one breath, they'll tell you viruses are not living organisms. In the next breath, they're talking about them as though they are living organisms. They tell you that they're shooting dead viruses into you to prevent polio. I do not know just how a dead virus can prevent live viruses from doing their work, but the medical profession probably has some kind of an explanation. To avoid polio, or to avoid any other disease, it is necessary to avoid the causes that produce it. And the idea that you can be immunized against disease, that is, that you can be made disease-proof, is an idea that, if it were true, would involve the suspension of the law of cause and effect. Are any of us here this evening foolish enough to believe that the law of cause and effect can be suspended? And yet that is exactly what you're offered. God didn't make you disease-proof, and when the physician with his little squirt gun or his vaccine point tells you that he can do a better job than God did, send him around the corner to the booby hatch, where he really belongs. You can't be made disease-proof by any means at all except by avoiding the causes that produce it. Stop building your diseases, and you'll stop suffering with them. Now, to remove cause, it becomes necessary to know what cause is. We started several thousand years ago with the idea that disease is due to an attack on the body by evil spirits, demons or devils. And the methods of restoring the patients to health were means of casting out or exorcising these demons or devils. They burned people with firebrands. They poured all kinds of nauseous and disgusting substances down their throats, things that would cause them to vomit, or cause nausea, or cause diarrhea, or cause pain, or cause distress of some kind or another. And the more distressing the substance was, the more power it was supposed to possess in driving out the devil.
or the demon or the evil spirit. And today we have a system of practice that is directly descended from that ancient system. And while it is no longer, in this country at least, engaged in trying to exorcise evil spirits, it is still using the same means and measures, only it is trying to drive out or kill evil germs and evil viruses. Something else that is attacking the body. In other words, the reigning conception of the essential nature of disease today is identical with that of the caveman. We have made no progress in all these thousands of years in our conception of the essential nature of disease. And while we have changed our methods and measures more or less all down the ages, there has been a ceaseless change of methods. As a matter of fact, there has been an undying faith in the medicine man and his bag of tricks. In recent years, what have we seen? A great rash of wonder drugs, following one upon the heels of another, and cure-alls. Do you remember a few years back when it was almost, when artificial fever was almost a cure-all? Every time there was a medical meeting, new diseases were reported to be amenable to artificial fever. And then there was another period when every time there was a medical convention anywhere in the country, new diseases were reported as having yielded to treatment by snake venom. From artificial fever, suddenly we were introduced to frozen sleep, which they thought for a time was going to prove to be even more of a cure-all than artificial fever. But the frozen sleep didn't last long, because the sulfur drugs soon crowded it off the front pages of the newspapers and the magazines. And the sulfur drugs ran along for a few years and did their quota of damage, to be followed by penicillin. And penicillin, after doing much damage, and it is still doing much damage, had streptomycin and various other so-called antibiotics added to the list. And the only reason that the antibiotics have not been discarded, because not only because they have proven to be complete failures, but also because they have proven to be very damaging, the only reason they have not been discarded is that their researchers haven't been able to come up with something else equally as sensational. What is antibiotic? The word means opposed to life, and they definitely are opposed to life. Until the researchers come up with something else. Where they'll find it, I don't know. They get all these things out of decaying vegetables, out of rotting manure, and out of other nice places of that kind. They get their antibiotics from such sources. What they'll get them from now, I don't know. For thousands of years, they've been using all the dregs and scum of earth and sea to pump into the human body and to pour down the protesting throats of sick people in an endeavor to cure disease. They once had an adage in Latin. They still follow it, even though they don't use the adage. And I'm going to give it to you in English. Where there is poison, there is virtue. Where there is poison, there is virtue. And as a matter of fact, right here in these United States, in the middle part of the last century, the leading medical man and medical authority or medical author in this country at that time, a professor in one of the leading medical colleges, uttered the statement more than once, "Our strongest poisons are our best remedies." And that's all they're using today. They poison the sick to make them well. Why are they poisoning the sick? Because they are carrying on a warfare against attacking entities. Tomorrow morning you'll pick up your newspaper and you'll probably see on the front page, and if it isn't on the front page, it'll be somewhere over in the other pages, that some prominent citizen died of heart attack. He died of a heart attack. Now, the news item will not explain to you whether the heart attacked the individual or whether he attacked his heart. But anyhow, there was some kind of an attack. There isn't any such thing as disease floating around in the air or hiding in the obscure corners to pounce out upon you unawares without provocation on your part. Disease is of and by the body. It does not exist apart from the living organism. It is not an entity. It has no independent existence. There is no attack, and there is nothing to attack or to be attacked. This idea that disease is an attack also comes down to us from the days of ancient shamanism. Only in those days it was an attack by an evil spirit. Now, before we can remove cause, we must know what cause is. And if we're foolish enough to believe that these things represent cause, then we will permit ourselves to be poisoned, and they'll continue to poison us and to poison us until finally the undertaker finishes the job many years before we ought to die. I'm going to briefly trace for you the evolution of disease, and it is an evolution. To do so, I'm going to make a few statements that perhaps will seem to you dogmatic. But I haven't time to explain all of these things in detail in one lecture, so you'll have to either accept them as I present them or reject them as mere dogmas. That's up to you. To begin with, let me explain to you that nerve energy, whatever it is, and I don't know what it is any more than you do. And I don't know whether we'll ever know what it is or not. It doesn't make any difference. We don't have to know what it is. Nerve energy is functioning power. And the efficiency, the functional efficiency of our body depends at all times upon the amount of nerve energy that we possess. Now, nerve energy is not a fixed quantity. It rises and falls from day to day, from hour to hour, in keeping with our activities, physical, mental, emotional, and otherwise. So that we have more energy at one time or less at another time, depending upon our expenditures and our recuperations. Let me contrast the human body with an automobile to give you a picture of this matter. We have in the automobile burn dimly. In other words, when your nervous batteries are low, when you're enervated, the organs of your body function inefficiently, just as inefficiently as the various parts of your car when your battery has been allowed to run low. Enervation, or a state of lowered nerve energy, is brought on by a mode of living that uses up nerve force in excess of our ability to recuperate it or regenerate it during the hours that we allot to rest and repose. We expend energy by excesses, by overeating, by sexual excesses, by overbathing, by over-sunbathing, by overwork, and various other types of excesses. All sources of enervation are sources of trouble. Worry, fear, anxiety, jealousy, self-pity, anger, grief, and all emotions of that type. And some of us just love to worry. We aren't happy if we haven't got something to worry about. And these things are all enervating. And then there are our various stimulant habits. Just think of a nation of over 150 million people, nearly all of whom are drug addicts. Can you imagine that? If you are old enough to be out of the cradle, you are probably already a drug addict. If you live in these United States, you use coffee, which contains caffeine, or tea, which contains a similar poison, or chocolate or cocoa, which contains a similar poison, or you use beer or some other alcoholic drink, or you use tobacco in some form or another. You're taking, if you're just a little shaver that is still wearing three-cornered pants, you're taking one or the other of these, and if you're an old person, you're probably taking more than one, 3 or 4 or 5 soda fountain slops of one kind or another, all of which are poisoned, none of which have any business in the human body at any time, under any circumstances, for any purpose whatsoever. These things enervate. These poisons have to be removed from the body. They have to be resisted and expelled. And the processes of resistance and expulsion use up precious energy of life, producing enervation. And the more you're stimulated by them, the more enervated you become. Then there are other drug habits. How many of you carry aspirin in your purses? I know thousands of people do it. And you can buy aspirin today in the hot dog stands. 3 little aspirin tablets in a little cellophane package upon a little card. You can buy them in the hot dog stand. You can get them in the grocery stores. You can get them all over the country, even selling them in the filling stations.
That indicates to you how common is the use of these things. You have a headache, and instead of saying to yourself, now why do I have this headache? What have I done to produce it? What must I cease doing in order to avoid it? You take an aspirin and sandbag your nerves into insensibility. And the sale of the substances of that kind is equally as great. Millions of dollars are made every year from the sale of drugs that are intended to give you a temporary relief from discomfort and distress that follows your indiscriminate eating. So you had a meal that no digestive system on the face of the earth could digest with any degree of efficiency. You dumped your food in indiscriminately and haphazardly. The mixture is such that the digestive enzymes cannot possibly handle it. You have no just regard for the limitations of those enzymes. And you dumped your food in such a way that you have indigestion, you have gas, and you have pain and distress and discomfort. So you take a pill instead of reforming your mode of eating. Sometimes all you need to get away from that constant distress after meals is just to change your food combining. The first properly combined meal is often enough to put an end to it. That is, assuming that you continue to combine your meals properly thereafter. Now, wrong combinations of foods are not the only causes of indigestion. Don't get that idea. But what I want to point out to you is that our eating practices are such that they keep us at all times in discomfort and distress. And instead of changing our eating habits, we palliate our symptoms with drugs of one kind or another. And this also is enervating. But it's an evil in another way. It gives us temporary relief from our distress and encourages us to neglect or to ignore the causes that are producing the distress. And that is the evil of all methods of treatment. Even though there may be a certain measure of good in some of them, such, for example, as Christian Science, which gets you away from your fears and worries, it has its good side. But it causes you, if you take it seriously, to ignore the genuine causes of your trouble. Trouble that it denies even exists. So that is the evil that exists in these things. But we are enervating ourselves by our use of constipation cures and things, drugs to give us relief from our gastric distress after eating, and headache remedies and the other types of so-called remedies. They remedy nothing except the depleted purses of the people who sell them. We enervate ourselves. Then we enervate ourselves with 1,001 other forms of treatment. I remember when I was in college, and we studied massage for a while, and then we began to give each other massage for practice. And I got down on the massage table, and a student got on one side of me and another student on the other. But I'm not coming to that right now. I'm interested in impressing upon you the importance of avoiding all causes of enervation. Because enervation checks function, it lowers function. It lowers physiological efficiency. And among the functions that are lowered or checked is that of elimination. Now the human body is a poison factory. Every living organism is a poison factory. From before birth until the time of death, every action of every cell and every tissue and every organ and every system in your body is turning out waste matter, all of which is poisonous. It is in continuous process of formation in the body. And normally it is as continuously removed from the body by the organs of elimination. So long as these organs of elimination can function normally, they keep the bloodstream and the lymph stream sweet and pure. And the tissues are freed of toxins and they remain healthy. But when the organs of elimination begin to lag in their functions, a certain amount of these wastes are held up in the tissue, in the bloodstream, and they accumulate in the blood and lymph and tissues, producing the condition that we designate toxemia. Now, what is toxemia? It is a condition of self-poisoning, a true self-poisoning, resulting from the retention of body waste. Enervation checks elimination. Checked elimination results in the retention and accumulation of body waste, and that produces toxemia. But elimination also, besides checking excretion, which is elimination, checks secretion. That means that our digestive secretions are inadequate. So we suffer with indigestion as a consequence of enervation. It means that our ductless glands are not doing a good job, so that our nutrition
Even after the food is digested and gets into the bloodstream, our nutritive processes are below par, and we're not properly nourished. So we suffer from a condition of partial starvation on the one hand and toxemia on the other. And these two twins, Siamese twins, you can't separate them. These Siamese twins constitute the basic and the universal cause of all of mankind's so-called diseases. There may be other superadded complicating causes, but these are basic, and these are universal. The other causes are more or less harmless in the absence of the toxemia. What matters it if you have a big Thanksgiving dinner? If you're in good health and you're not toxemic, if you have normal nerve energy, well, you may have a little sense of fullness, there may be a little distress, but you'll throw it off and you'll be all right. But if you're innervated and toxemic and you eat that same dinner, you're likely to come up with measles or pneumonia or something else. So our superadded causes are effective in producing trouble or in inducing greater trouble only if we're enervated and toxemic. Now, how are we to remove these conditions? In order to get well of our trouble, there are three major needs of recovery. First, we must eliminate toxemia. Second, we must restore normal nerve energy. Third, we must correct the mode of living that is responsible for the innervation and toxemia. How do we do this? Well, in the first place, we need some means of immediately increasing elimination. And how are we to do it without first increasing our supply of nerve energy? It can be done. Now, the human body has means of switching its energy from one place to another. As, for example, you eat a big meal and go to bed and take it easy. Or you eat that same meal and go out and run for 4 hours. If you go to bed and take it easy, at the end of 4 hours, the meal is practically completely digested. If you go out and run for 4 hours, at the end of 4 hours, almost no digestion has taken place. You can't divide your attention in that way and do it efficient and carry on your functions efficiently. So when we stop activities that are regularly carried on, we immediately increase the amount of energy that is available for use through the eliminating organs. When we stop our patient from working, from running around, walking and talking, believe me, you can sure innervate yourself by talking. When we stop that, put the patient to bed and make him rest, there's an immediate increase in elimination because there is more energy now available for use through that channel. In other words, the energy that is customarily expended in these other activities is now available for use in the work of elimination. If we poise the patient's mind, if we get him to cut out his worry and his anxiety and his fear and his grief and his jealousy and all of these things, which isn't by any means an easy task, but it can be done slowly, then the energy ordinarily expended and wasted in these ways is immediately available for the work of elimination. If we cut him off from his tobacco and his coffee and his tea and his alcohol and his soda fountain slops and the various other things that he takes into his body and stops that waste of energy through the stimulant practices, all the energy commonly wasted in that way is immediately available for the work of elimination. And then, if we stop him from eating, you'll die no before noon if you don't have breakfast, but we stop him from eating. That means that the entire digestive tract, including the liver and the pancreas, along with it, has less work to do. And all the energy commonly expended in handling this huge meal that you spend 8 to 12 hours a day eating is conserved to be used elsewhere. If I take a patient who has a blood pressure of 160 and a pulse count of 80 a minute, and I put him to bed and stop him all of his stimulants and stop him from eating, within a few days his pulse rate is down to anywhere from 40 to 60. It usually settles after a few days somewhere around 60, and there it stays, except when you jump up and become active. But there it stays. The blood pressure falls. The heart is doing less work. Think of it. 80 beats a minute and now it's 60. That's
20 pulsations a minute less, pure, than it was doing beforehand. 20 a minute. 60 minutes in an hour means that the heart is pulsating 1,200 times less an hour than it was doing while you were active in eating. 1,200 times less in an hour. Now figure it out. There are 24 hours a day and 7 days in the week, and see for yourself the enormous saving in energy that heart gets from that rest. And not only does the heart rest, but the digestive tract rest, the liver rest, the pancreas rest, the lungs rest, the nervous system rest, the glandular system rest. The whole physiology takes a rest except the eliminating organs, and they work overtime because they've got more energy to do it, and they have lots of work that they've got to do. They're way behind on their work. So they begin immediately, and within 12 to 24 hours after you institute this program, you can see with your own unaided eye, or you can send the materials to the laboratory and have them analyzed and discover through chemical analysis that you have induced a great increase in elimination of toxins from the body. And that elimination continues right on through that fast or that period of physiological rest until the toxins are eliminated. Then the excretions become normal. Slowly they return more and more towards normal until they become normal, and the patient who hasn't had any desire for food up to this time becomes hungry and he wants to eat. And we feed him. Now he's cleaned out, but he's thin, and often he's weak. Sometimes he's not. I've had patients that were so weak when I started them on the fast that they couldn't walk up the steps. I had them to get down on their hands and knees and crawl up the steps. And after a week of fasting, I've seen them get up and on their feet and run up the steps. I see things like this all the time, so I know that that old medical slogan that you have to eat plenty of good nourishing food to keep up your strength is not true. We have to stop all nerve leaks if we expect to recuperate our energy. Having done this, we are in a state of health, but we are not in a state of positive, vigorous health. To build positive, vigorous health, we have to take up our second requisite of health, or of recovery. And this is supply the body with all of the primordial requisites of life. Now what are they? Air, and sunshine, and exercise, and rest, and sleep, and cleanliness, and poise of mind. These are the requisites of life, not poisons. What is a poison? Anything that is not a food is a poison. Anything that you put into your body that cannot be converted into living structure is a poison. Now, poisons range in toxicity all the way from almost nil at one end of the scale to such high toxicity at the other end that a drop of them placed on your tongue will kill almost like a stroke of lightning. But anything, however innoxious it may appear to you, that cannot be used constructively for your body should never be taken into that body, whether you're well or sick. And keep this in mind. The sick organism cannot make use of anything that the well organism cannot make use of. You do not give poisons to the well in order to nourish them. You know that if you poison the sick man, the well man, you make him sick. Why then do you expect to give poisons to the sick man to make him well? They only make him sicker if they do not kill him outright, which they frequently do. Very few patients suffering with acute disease ever die of the disease or its causes. They die of the treatment. This is not to say that the physicians deliberately kill their patients. They believe in what they're doing, and the fact that they believe in it is demonstrated by this series of facts. They take the drugs themselves, they give them to the members of their family, and to their friends and relatives. Oh, there are physicians who don't. They don't take them and they won't give them to their families. They know enough about them to know not to, but they do give them to their patients. And then there are physicians who don't give them to their patients. They give them what they call placebos. These things are harmless in themselves, but at the same time, if the patient gets well,
he doesn't attribute his recovery to whatever of hygiene that the physician may have employed along with his bread pill or his colored water. He attributes his recovery to that marvelous medicine that the doctor gave him. Now bear this in mind. Everything that you do, everything that you come in contact that is inimical hurts you in just this way. Worry produces enervation. Fear produces enervation. Jealousy produces enervation. Excitement produces enervation. Overwork produces enervation. Overeating produces enervation. Overstimulation produces enervation. Sexual excesses produce enervation. All of these things produce enervation. You don't have to look for specific results from any of them. One particular disease caused by worry and another particular disease caused by overeating and another particular disease caused by something else. It doesn't work that way. These things produce enervation. Enervation results in toxemia. Toxemia produces your various diseases, and your disease develops in keeping with your own diathesis or your own constitutional tendencies, and in keeping with the abuses and taxes that you place upon various organs of your body. Those organs that are most taxed are the ones that become ill first. Whether it's by work, by environment, by habit, or whatnot, or those organs that are weakest from hereditary causes. These are the ones that become ill first. Your disease, out of the same toxemic condition, develops in keeping with your constitutional tendencies. They need not develop. Constitutional tendencies are not causes of disease. They only determine the kind of disease you have. Toxemia is the cause, and the motivation brings on the toxemia. Correct that motivation. That is important. How? How do you stop smoking? Well, you taper off. No, you don't, because the practice of tapering off gets you down just so far, and then you start tapering on again. Before you know it, you're smoking more than before you started tapering off. There's only one way to stop smoking, and that's to stop abruptly. Oh, you'll be irritable and grouchy for a few days. I've seen men that were so grouchy when they tried to stop smoking and so irritable and nobody could get along with them, and the wife would finally go and get the old man's pipe and bring it and say, "Here, go on back to smoking. I can't tolerate like that." But if he'd just hold on for a few days, he'd eliminate all the accumulated nicotine from his body, his nerves would be repaired, and he'd enter into a new life. And he wouldn't be grouchy and irritable anymore. As a matter of fact, he'd be more cheerful than he'd been for years. Now, if you want some means of stopping smoking that'll make it easy for you, who worries. It's the sick person who's full of fears. It's the sick person who is anxious. It's the sick person who is emotionally upset all the time. Build positive health, and your emotions will tend to become normal. Now let's sum up what I've said. Healthy life depends upon an adequate supply and due proportion of the primordial requisites of life, which consist of food and water and air and sunshine and rest and sleep and activity and cleanliness and mental poise. Disease is built by a mode of living that uses up nerve energy in excess, thus producing enervation, which checks elimination and secretion, which builds the condition we know as toxemia. And this causes our so-called diseases. Recovery of health involves first a restoration of nerve energy, an elimination of toxemia, and a correction of the mode of living, plus supplying the body with the primordial requisites of health is a second requisite of recovery. And now let me tell you a little story that I believe well indicates to you, or well illustrates to you, what happens when you go to the various cures.
If there's inflammation in that, it's perimetritis. And again, the heart muscle is known as the myocardium, from a Greek word meaning heart, and muscle, from two Greek words. If the inflammation is in the muscle, it's myocarditis. If it's in the lining membrane of the heart, it's endocarditis. If it's in the investing membrane of the heart, it's pericarditis. And if it's all three of them, it's perimyoendocarditis. And so we go. And we can go on through the body. Itis is a little Greek suffix meaning inflammation. So if you see itis, remember that means inflammation.
And then the word that follows that precedes it. I mean, the part of the word that precedes it tells you where it's located. Now they don't tell you have inflammation of the womb because they can't charge you $5 for that. They say you have metritis. That's worth $5. And besides that, if they tell you that you have inflammation of the womb, you might suspect that inflammation is inflammation wherever it's located. And so it is. It's all the same thing. They've got more than 20,000 diseases. Now, how do we do it? Let's go down into the lower end of the colon. We get down here, way down on the left side, and we have an S-shaped part of the colon that we call the sigmoid. And right down in the last 2 or 3 inches of the colon is a little part that we call the rectum. Now, when you have inflammation in the rectum, they don't call it rectitis, they call it proctitis. But what I want to bring out is, if you have inflammation of the sigmoid, that's sigmoiditis. Now these 2 parts of the colon are continuous with each other. They're not really parts. They're divided off there for convenience of somebody or the other. There's no line of demarcation between the one or the other. You can't find any line that divides the rectum from the sigmoid. But let's imagine a little hairline that goes around on the inside that divides the two. Now, we get just a 1/16 of an inch over on one side of that little hairline with a little inflammation and we've got proctitis. We go just a 1/16 of an inch on the other side and we've got sigmoiditis. Every quarter of an inch of anatomy calls for another name. And that's the way you get 20,000 diseases. It's almost impossible to imagine how many diseases human beings can have if they just keep dividing them up in little bitty parts like that and giving a separate name to inflammation in each little part. I don't know why we can't divide him up into several million cells and name the diseases after each cell so we can have several million diseases. Think of all the specialists we could have if we had a specialist for each particular cell in the body. They went so far over in London once as to actually create specialists for diseases of the navel. Yes, they did. Specialists for diseases of the navel. Will Rogers once said that he had something wrong with his right eye, and he went to an eye specialist in Chicago to have him look after his eye, and he said, "I'm very sorry, I'm a left eye specialist. The right eye specialist is across the hall there." What's the matter with a physician that can't take care of the human body? That he has to puzzle it out. One fellow takes care of your eyes, and the other your nose, and another your throat, and another your stomach, and another your womb, and another your big toe, and so on and so forth. When the same thing that will produce inflammation in the little finger on the left hand will produce inflammation in the big toe on the right foot. The same internal condition, the same blood and flesh condition that I've just described to you as toxemia produces all of your troubles. I mean by that it is basic. There can be other and complicating causes superadded to that toxic state. But they're secondary, and they're unimportant in the absence of the primary and basic cause. Now, how do we develop that? Let's go back. A mode of living, such as I described to you in the first part of my lecture last night, that uses up nerve energy in excess of your ability to recuperate it or to regenerate it during the hours of rest and repose, lowers nerve energy. Nerve energy is functioning power. When nerve energy is lowered, elimination is checked. Secretion and excretion are both checked. Then we have an accumulation of the normal waste of life in the blood and lymph and tissue. This is what we mean by the term toxemia. I said secretion is checked, as well as excretion. Excretion is merely a more technical term for elimination. When secretion is checked, the digestive juices, among other secretions of the body, are not produced in adequate quantities or in proper quality. One of the first noticeable signs of this will be perhaps indigestion. Now, a lot of you people go around suffering with indigestion and don't realize you have it because you have no pain, you have no distress, you have no discomfort. You haven't any symptoms that indicate to you that there's anything wrong. Nothing hurts me, I eat anything I want. How many thousands of times have I heard that? And then a year or two later, the same individual comes back and says, I don't know what's wrong with me, I can't eat anything. Everything I eat turns to gas. What do you think has happened to him in the meantime? He's just become a little more toxemic and a little more enervated. And now his symptoms are beginning to show up. But let us keep this thing in mind. Diseases, whatever we name them, do not come into existence full-blown. Disease is an evolution. It starts in minute and imperceptible beginnings, and it gradually evolves, step by step, and stage by stage, from that first cold or first diarrhea in infancy to diabetes, or Bright's disease, or cancer, or tuberculosis, or hardening of the arteries, or heart disease, or apoplexy, or some other of the so-called degenerative diseases of later life by the time you're 35 to 40 or 50. All the time that evolution of disease is going on, it is interspersed.
Nonetheless, during the past few days, I've had the pleasure of lecturing to most of you, and during that time I have received numerous questions about how to cure arthritis and asthma and various other things. And while I have emphasized to you the fact that I am not engaged in the curing business and that curing disease is a voodoo program, I have continued to say to you, I'm going to give you the details for that Friday. Some of those on the front seat had a great bit of fun out of that, but those of you who were kept asking what to do for this, that, and the other were really trying to run before you learned to walk. It was necessary that you get the preceding lectures before you could be prepared to understand all that you need to understand in caring for yourself with these various conditions that you ask about. Tonight I want to tell you how you may recover health, provided, of course, the damage to some of your vital organs is not so great that it is beyond vital redemption. Walking down the street the other day here in the city, I passed a bookstore. It was closed. But there were books in the window on display. And I saw one that was entitled, How to Live with Your Allergy. Another, How to Live with Your Ulcer. Another, How to Live with Your Migraine Headache. There were other How to Live with Your Doubles there. They were written by medical men. And I found, as I looked at those titles, there is an open confession of absolute failure. Exploding it by knowing the law and the conditions of its operation. So we too, if we know the laws of life and the conditions for its varied operations in producing its varied and different effects, can produce health and disease at will. I do not intend for you to understand me to say by that this evening that our knowledge of such things is already sufficiently great that we can do all of that to our satisfaction. I do want you to understand, however, that we do know a sufficient amount about the laws of life and a sufficient amount about the conditions of the operations of those laws to produce their various effects, that it is possible for us to live in such a way and to provide such conditions of life under which to live as to provide us excellent health and to maintain that health indefinitely. Life is not, as we have been taught in the past, a matter of haphazard. It is not a matter of chance. It is subject to law, as much so as everything else in this universe. And instead of studying the laws of life in the past, instead of studying causes and effects, We have been chasing for more than 3,000 years the will-o'-the-wisp of cures around the same old mulberry bush or gooseberry bush. As fast as one cure faded away, we brought on two more. The first requisite in the recovery of health then involves a condition that has been all down the ages neglected by all of the schools of so-called healing. It is this: remove or correct all of the causes that are impairing and have impaired health. The methods of caring for the sick in the past have ignored cause. As I explained to you on the first evening you were here, the old methods were simply this: if you had a diarrhea, give something to check the bowels. If you were constipated, give something to force the bowels to move. If you had a headache, give something to sandbag the nerves into insensibility so you couldn't feel the ache. If you have gas and distress, take the Bellans or Alka-Seltzer. Treat the symptoms. If you go through a medical textbook on the practice of medicine and take up disease after disease as you go along, you will be surprised at the monotony and the frequency with which a phrase such as this will follow in giving the care of each disease. Treat the symptoms as they arise.
I heard it. You see, I heard the other program. That's why I asked the same question. I'm no fool. About yourself, sir, may I ask you, why did you choose natural hygiene? Dr. Shelton.
Well, I can't tell you the story that many do, that I chose it because I was ill. I wasn't. I haven't been ill. My life has been more or less one of health. I was a high school boy, and by mere accident I discovered a magazine devoted to it on a magazine stand one Saturday evening while I was going to the theater. I bought it, I read it, it appealed to my sense of reason, and I started then to study it. Later, I went to college to take it up. I didn't have any idea of using it professionally. When I went to college, I wanted it to get the knowledge really for my own personal use. It was after I got into college and got into the psychology of professionalism that I decided to use it professionally. That was back in, when I first was introduced to it back in 1911.